my vision has not gotten any better, so I am blind as can be when I go to reading. So there's nothing I can see without glasses. That is for sure. So if I take them on and off, that's pretty much what I did before, but now it's because I can't see a word at all. So looking at the lesson, the title is Zechariah Hears from God. And I hope it comes across that I found this a good lesson to teach. And you teachers know what I'm talking about. There's some lessons that are like, there's no way I can talk for 30 minutes on this or 20 minutes. But then there's some lessons that you feel comfortable. You know, when you read it, your heart kind of smiles a little bit. So what it's talking about is from Luke, and we're talking about having a baby, but it's not really all about the baby. It is about Zechariah hearing from God, and it does start out in Luke chapter 1, verse 8 through 20. And in the lesson background, the writer talks about in Luke, there's not just one birth that we automatically think of. There's two births. But the angel, you know, that's the first thing that comes to mind. Everybody thinks about how the angel came to him and said, "You're going to have a baby," and it's, you know. And can you imagine what Joseph was going? I don't know this woman. You know, how is there a baby? He was old enough to know the facts of life. You know, so he's like, I can't marry her. I can't wed her. It's the first thing that possibly popped in his mind is she's going to lay shame on my house. She's going to make me look kind of crazy if I marry her. You know, but here what the lesson is talking about is that it says the two gospel accounts describe Jesus' birth and its context. Also in Matthew, not just Luke, but Matthew, it says Luke's account is distinct in at least two ways. The first events were the birth of Jesus' cousin, and we of course know who that is, John the Baptist. And so oftentimes we forget about the miracle that his parents had. You know, it was the same thing that Joseph saw. An angel came to him, but it says both pregnancies were announced by an angel, were accompanied by great wonders, it says. And then it says, and had prepared, the angel had prepared people for God's salvation. And it says, second, I'm actually not able to read my own writing. Sorry, folks. You know, it's a praise to the Lord. Not just Zechariah. It says Mary, Zechariah, and Simeon. They all give praise to the Lord for his works. It says Luke's account opens by way of introducing Zechariah. It says the father of John and a priest in the division of, he was a priest. And it's Zechariah and other priests, descendants from Aaron. It says the brother of Moses. Over the centuries, I found this very interesting. It says Aaron's descendants, they were so many of them that they had to draw lots to see who would be the one to go in and pray. You know, back then everybody didn't get to pray. You know, every Sunday our altar is open. It is always open. It's not just Sundays. If Jerry's has a bad day and he thinks, I need the church, not just prayer. I need to get here, I need to go on my knees, and I need to pray. This thing's open 24/7. You know, goes on to say, Aaron's descendants became so numerous that they were to the point that they could not all serve in the temple. Well, you think about that, you're like, oh, Aaron's my great-great-grandpa. I'm going to get to do this. And then you have to kind of be lucky to get to do it. And so I know I'm one. Do you ever fall asleep before you say your prayers? Like we always taught our children, pray before you go to sleep. Is there ever a day that you fall asleep in the recliner? You sit down for just a minute and you wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning with the TV going. It's not that, that noise anymore, but, there's times that we've taught our children, pray before you go to sleep. Pray when you wake up. But so here, this is something they have expected. It says, King David had organized the priests and divisions for the service. And it says every division would serve in the temple for roughly 2 non-consecutive weeks each year. But that doesn't say each person, like Brad has people lined up each month. And you do somebody has the first week, the second week, the third week, you swap out for the opening. They weren't that lucky. I have like the 8th Sunday. If one of Aaron's descendants wanted to step in and teach for me here, we could arrange that. But so it says Zechariah and his wife Elizabeth, also a descendant of Aaron, were righteous in the sight of God and blameless regarding obeying his commandments. So the couple was without children due to their ages and Elizabeth's barrenness. So going to start the lesson, again, it's from Luke 1:8 through 20. Verse 8, it says, once when Zechariah's division was on duty and he was serving as priest before God, he was chosen by lot, and that don't mean Lot the man, it means by luck. Like I said, it was just, he got lucky to do it. It said, well, we know it's not actually luck, it's God's doing. It says, according to the customs of the priesthood, to go into the temple of the Lord and burn incense. So this is definitely not something we do now, but that was their tradition back then. It says twice daily a priest would enter the outer sanctuary and burn incense on the altar of incense. It says the rising smoke and the fragrant aroma represented the people's prayers going up to God. And so it even talked about how if you were outside, you might smell the burn. I walked out of Daddy's the other day and somebody was burning something, either fire or a building to the ground. I'm not sure which, but you can smell it in the air. So the people who had given their prayers to Zechariah, or maybe they had middle person to pass it on, because can you imagine how many people were out there and him trying to hear everybody? But so he was to present everybody's prayers. And it said, then it says, because of the numerous priests, oh, I'm so sorry, I jumped backwards. Anyway, it talks about how they could smell the smoke, but then they could also smell the incense. And of course, it would have been natural stuff. I mean, they didn't go down to Bed Bath & Beyond and buy some great smelling sachets or candles. They literally would use what they had. I'm sure I can see the women going out and picking the dried flowers or even the live ones, and that's what they did, I would think. But so verse 10, it says, and when the time for the burning of incense came, all the assembled worshipers were praying outside. So while Zechariah is inside praying and burning the incense and everything, he's also praying. He's praying all the prayers that they want God to hear. And of course, like we said back then, that's how it was done. It says, but the people outside are still praying. You know, I'm sure they're praying, Lord, please help Zechariah put my prayer before you. But, you know, now that's not needed, but they were still praying outside. It says, because only the chosen priest entered the holy place where the altar of incense was located. The assembled worshipers were scattered throughout the temple's courts as the priests burned the incense. The people were restricted to the various outer courts because of God's requirements regarding who could enter that space. It was not as though the people were unholy. Their acts of praying highlighted their commitment to the Lord. So that was showing that they knew what they needed to do. Even though the priests were the ones presenting the prayers, the worshipers knew they needed to as well. Verse 12, it says, when Zechariah saw him, he was startled. I think I skipped something. I sure did. Verse 11, then an angel of the Lord appeared to him, standing at the right side of the altar of incense. So, Brad, if you're at home outside doing something and that angel comes to you, is it going to be you thinking that Tracy's pregnant? So can you imagine the age of these people? I mean, I'm old compared to, well, we don't know how old they were. At least I don't know. Y'all might know, it might tell, but so what was old to them might not be but our age now, you know. But so I can't fathom. Schedule me a whole ride on the pink elevators at First Health is what I say. But so it says, what would y'all think that the first thing would be? He was scared. You know, I cannot fathom. It says, a heavenly visitor, such as an angel of the Lord, was a representative of God. It says, though not used here when Scripture includes the definite article, it says angel of the Lord, but the reference, everybody knew it was God himself. You know, if an angel came, that's who it was. Verse 12, when Zechariah saw him, he was startled and was gripped with fear. That's just an understatement if you ask me. Verse 13a, but the angel said to him, what? Everybody knows? Do not be afraid. It says, Zechariah, your prayer has been heard. So the lesson writer talks about not knowing, is that a prayer that Zechariah has been praying for years and he quit maybe 10 years ago? Because, you know, there are people who wanted to have children and who didn't have children. And there come a time in their life they said, okay, God, you know, please don't give me a child now, like Brad says. But, you know, but God, he, of course, knows what he's doing. So at this time in Zechariah and Elizabeth's life, this is when he chose to answer his prayer. And says, the first words of the angel provided comfort. So don't be afraid, you know, don't let me scare you. It says the command reassured God's people of his presence and calmed their nerves. The text is unclear which particular prayer Zechariah had been praying. So what is God answering? You know, he probably thinks, well, I've been praying for our community. You know, we know they didn't have a power outage like we did, but there are things that go through communities. Maybe there's a sick child they've been praying for. Maybe there's, an older person that, like Norris, that we're praying for. That was, of course, back then, they didn't call it hospice, but, they had ladies that came around and helped. They gathered around their own. They supported their own. So what prayer was it that Zechariah prayed is the angel saying, it's okay, don't be scared. So says, I'm sorry, y'all, I lost my place again. Perhaps they felt that because of, this is talking about Zechariah and Elizabeth, maybe they thought that having a child of their own was out of the question. I would hope it was out of my question. It said, such a prayer, however, would have been consistent with the prayers of their ancestors. Then it talks about also, he would have been praying for Israel's salvation. It's here, though, I found this very interesting because I myself have had this thought, and maybe none of you have, and so, but do y'all remember when we used to have people that would get up and pray? The prayer during the Sunday was the people's prayer. It was somebody out of the congregation that the pastor got up and asked to pray. And so what if Zechariah was praying for Zechariah's family? My sister, Sarah, my brother, Tom. What if he wasn't including any of the rest? What if he wasn't talking about the man who is in hospice care or the sick child? So it says, whatever the content of Zechariah's prayer, God answered the prayer in a way that possibly addressed both the desire for a child and a desire to see Israel's salvation. The rest of verse 13, your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you are to call him John. So here the angel is telling Zechariah, well, you're gonna have a little boy, and you're gonna name him John. It says a son was likely surprising to Zechariah. Only the one true God could work such a miracle. It does say the word John, or the name John, was common among men in New Testament. It likely came from the Hebrew name Johanan, maybe. But the meaning is God's graciousness. So I never knew that. That's pretty cool. Verse 14, he will be a joy and delight to you, and many will rejoice because of his birth. And, we've never had anything like that happen to us, but when something does go our way or a prayer is answered, you definitely have joy and delight. And says it would replace feelings of fear. Because, this angel is just talking to him, and he would be scared to death, I think. It says the birth of this child would have a much wider impact than just on Zechariah and Elizabeth. We all know what an important person John the Baptist was. It says he would be a forerunner, preparing the way for the salvation. It talks about. The next verse it says, for he will be great in the sight of the Lord. That's kind of an understatement, isn't it, y'all? It says John's great standing would not be measured by worldly standards of success. He wouldn't be a lawyer or a judge. He sure wouldn't be a rock star. So what the kids would think now, how many followers does he have, or how's it going on TikTok, or, all those things. He would definitely be one that changes the world. So among those born of women, there is no one greater than John. John's greatness is the sight of the land. John's greatness in the sight of the land would come from his role as the person who would announce the good news of the arrival of God's salvation. The rest of 15, it says, he is never to take wine or other fermented drinks. And so it goes on to talk about that this was something that he was not to do. The rest of 15, and he will be filled with the Holy Spirit even before he is born. So he is definitely to be a blessed man and to bring great things. Verse 16, he will bring back many of the people of Israel to the Lord their God. So there's a lot of people that had known of God's wonder and God's greatness, and they had slipped. And so this was a way that God could draw them back in. Y'all look at what John is, or listen to what John is saying. Then the next verse is, sorry, I do think I've skipped something, but maybe not. And now you will be silent and not be able to speak until the day this happens. So why do you think that he told Zechariah that? Because he didn't believe it? He's questioning? As I said, when that angel came to Brad and said, Tracy's going to have a child, and Brad said, what are you talking about? So they said, Brad, you can't say another word until this child is born. So I started saying, and Tracy goes, thank you, Jesus. But so Zechariah, this is what happened to him. And the rest of that verse, it says, you will not be able to speak until the day this happens, because you did not believe my words, which will come true at their appointed time. So looking at the scriptures, thinking about the coming time of the birth of Jesus, also think about the birth of John, who definitely was very, very important in Jesus and in our salvation. Without him, it's not only about Jesus' birth, but it is. But we also need to think about John and his part in there. Y'all have a good week.